Welcome to Café Tales. I am Alie, your host for today's mystery. Today, we find ourselves in the glittering world of 1934, Monte Carlo, where Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings encounter deadly deception beneath the crystal chandeliers of Monaco's famous casino and death on the casino floor. Before we begin, I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from today. Let me know in the comments. Grab a coffee, stay curious, and let's step into a world where fortune and fate dance on the edge of a roulette wheel. Death on the Casino Floor, Chapter 1. The final Spini have always maintained that there is something peculiarly intoxicating about the atmosphere of Monte Carlo in the spring. The Mediterranean air carries with it a heavy mixture of jasmine, sea salt, and that indefinable scent of money changing hands with reckless abandon. On that particular evening in May of 1934, as I stood beside my friend Hercule Poirot in the glittering main salon of the famous casino, I felt the familiar thrill that comes from witnessing human nature at its most revealing. "Regard Hastings," murmured Poirot, his sharp eyes surveying the scene before us with characteristic intensity. "Observe how the electric lights reflect upon the faces of these gamblers. Each one tells a story. Nest CIPA. I followed his gaze across the opulent room, where crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows over green baize tables, the soft click of chips, the gentle whir of roulette wheels, and the subdued murmur of conversation in half a dozen languages, created a symphony of sophisticated vice. Ladies in evening gowns of emerald silk and sapphire chiffon stood beside gentlemen in immaculate dinner jackets, their faces bearing that peculiar expression of controlled excitement that marks the serious gambler. We had been invited to Monaco by Monsieur Henry Dubois, the casino's distinguished manager, who had mentioned in his letter a small matter requiring Poirot's expertise. What that matter might be, he had not specified, though he had assured us of the casino's hospitality and hinted at generous compensation for any assistance rendered. "I say, Poirot," I ventured, adjusting my evening tie, "that fellow over there seems to be attracting quite a crowd." My attention had been drawn to a distinguished gentleman of perhaps 60 years, whose silvered hair and commanding presence marked him as a man of considerable importance. He stood at the principal roulette table, a substantial pile of chips arranged before him with military precision. The other players had unconsciously formed a semicircle around him, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity and awe. "Ah," replied Poirot, nodding thoughtfully. "Sir Reginald Pembroke, the industrialist. Monsieur Dubois mentioned him to me earlier this evening. It appears that fortune has been most kind to him of late." Sir Reginald possessed that particular bearing of a man accustomed to command. His evening clothes were perfectly tailored, his white shirt front immaculate, and his manner suggested someone who had never doubted his right to the best that life could offer. Yet, as I watched him more closely, I detected something else: a tension in his shoulders, a brightness in his eyes that spoke of excitement, stretched almost to the breaking point. The croupier, a thin man with precise movements and an air of professional detachment, called for bets. The usual flutter of activity ensued as players placed their chips, but all eyes remained fixed upon Sir Reginald. He stood motionless for a long moment, his hand hovering over his substantial stack of chips. "Messieurs, dames, faites vos jeux," announced the croupier in the traditional manner. Sir Reginald's hand moved decisively. He gathered not merely a portion of his chips, but what appeared to be the entire staka sum that, even from our position, some 20 feet away, was clearly enormous. The crowd around the table fell silent, and I noticed that even the players at neighboring tables had begun to take notice. "Good Lord," I whispered to Poirot, "he's putting it all on a single number." "Precisement," murmured my friend, his attention now completely focused on the scene before us. "And observe, Hastings, he shows no hesitation. This is not the desperate gamble of a man facing ruin, but the calculated move of one who believes he possesses certain knowledge." The atmosphere in our immediate vicinity had grown electric. I could hear whispered comments in English, French, and what sounded like Russian, all speculating about the size of Sir Reginald's wager. A waiter paused in his duties to watch, and I noticed that even the usually impassive croupier seemed affected by the tension. Sir Reginald's hand was poised above the betting layout, his fingers gripping a tower of high-denomination chips that represented what must have been a fortune. His face bore an expression of supreme confidence, almost of triumph, as though he were about to accomplish something he had long planned. "Les jeux sant fates," called the croupier, but his voice seemed strangely distant. It was at that precise moment that Sir Reginald Pembroke's expression changed. The look of confident calculation vanished, replaced by one of sudden bewilderment. His hand, still clutching the chips, began to tremble. The tower of markers swayed dangerously. "I say," I began, taking a step forward, but before I could complete the thought, Sir Reginald's face contorted in what appeared to be intense pain. His free hand clutched at his chest, and the chips scattered across the green baize. As he collapsed backward into the arms of a startled onlooker, that the salon erupted in confusion. Ladies screamed, gentlemen shouted for assistance, and the croupier's voice could be heard calling for the house physician. Through it all, I was dimly aware of Poirot moving forward with surprising swiftness for a man of his rotund figure, his keen eyes already cataloguing details that would later prove significant. The casino's physician, a competent-looking gentleman with greying whiskers, arrived within moments and knelt beside the fallen man. After a brief examination, he looked up gravely at the assembled crowd. "I am afraid Sir Reginald has suffered a massive cardiac episode," he announced in accented English. "The excitement, the stress of gambling, such things can be fatal to a man of his age." As the physician's words settled over the crowd, I noticed Poirot kneeling beside the body, his nostrils slightly dilated, as though detecting some subtle scent. He rose slowly, his face wearing that expression of thoughtful concern that I had learned to recognize as the beginning of one of his investigations. The great Sir Reginald Pembroke, master of industry, and, apparently, of the gambling tables, still among the scattered chips that had represented his final, never-completed wager. The wheel continued to spin for a moment longer before the croupier brought it to a stop. The little white ball came to rest on number 7. Red Dot Chapter 2. The House Always Knows. The following morning found Poirot and myself in the sumptuous private office of Monsieur Henry Dubois, situated high above the main gaming floor, with windows that afforded a commanding view of the Mediterranean. Dubois himself was a man of perhaps 50, impeccably groomed in the continental fashion, with the sort of diplomatic bearing that comes from years of managing the delicate egos and dangerous impulses of the international gambling set. "Gentlemen," he began, settling behind his mahogany desk with visible unease, "I must confess that Sir Reginald's death has created a most delicate situation for the establishment." Poirot, seated in the leather chair opposite, had arranged himself, with his characteristic precision, feet flat upon the floor, hands placed symmetrically upon his knees, his egg-shaped head tilted at an attentive angle. "Indeed, Monsieur Dubois," he replied smoothly. "Precisement of what nature of delicacy do you refer?" Dubois cleared his throat and reached for a manila folder that lay before him. "Sir Reginald's recent gambling activities have been, shall we say, unprecedented. In the past 4 weeks, he has won consistently at our roulette tables, to a degree that defies mathematical probability." "How consistently?" I interjected, though I confess the finer points of gambling mathematics have always escaped me. "Over 200,000 francs, Dubois replied, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "In 28 separate sessions, he lost only twice, and those losses were minimal." Poirot's eyebrows rose fractionally. "And this troubled you, not your element?" Dubois spread his hands in a gesture of obvious distress. "Such a winning streak is virtually impossible through chance alone. We began to suspect ... irregularities." "Cheating, you mean?" I said bluntly. "No, no." Dubois shook his head vigorously. "Our security observed Sir Reginald most carefully. He employed no devices, marked no cards, influenced no wheels. His method of play was entirely legitimate, yet, somehow, he appeared to know." "No, what exactly?" Poirot inquired, his tone deceptively casual. Dubois hesitated, then opened the folder before him. "Our records show that Sir Reginald consistently wagered upon numbers that won with alarming frequency. More troubling still, he often appeared to receive guidance comments, small pieces of paper. Our floor staff noticed him consulting them before placing his bets. When approached, he claimed they were merely his own calculations, but he trailed off meaningfully." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "But you suspected otherwise?" "We suspected he was receiving information from someone with intimate knowledge of our operations," Dubois admitted reluctantly. "The timing of his wins, the specific numbers he chose, it suggested someone with access to our wheel maintenance schedules, our croupier rotations, perhaps even our security protocols." I felt a chill of understanding. You mean someone was feeding him inside information? It is the only logical explanation, Dubois confirmed. No gambler, however skilled, maintains such a record through luck alone. Poirot had withdrawn his small notebook and was making precise entries with his fountain pen. These pieces of paper that Sir Reginald consulted were any recovered, malheureusement, note. He was most careful to dispose of them immediately after each session. Our cleaning staff found only ashes in the ashtrays at his preferred tables. Curious, murmured Poirot. And yesterday evening did you observe him receiving such guidance? Dubois nodded grimly. Indeed. Approximately 1 hour before his collapse, a waiter delivered what appeared to be a cocktail to his table. Beneath the glass was a small envelope. Sir Reginald opened it discreetly, read the contents, and immediately burned the paper in the ashtray provided for cigars. This waiter, I asked, was he a regular member of your staff? That is what disturbs me most, Captain Hastings Dubois replied. The waiter in question was Marcel Beaumont, one of our junior croupiers who occasionally assists with table service. During busy periods, Marcel has been with us for 3 years and has always been entirely trustworthy. Poirot's pen paused above his notebook. Has been trustworthy, you say? Do you now have cause to doubt him? A flush of embarrassment colored Dubois's cheeks. I have recently learned that Marcel has accumulated certain financial obligations, gambling debts to establishments less reputable than our own. Ah, said Poirot softly. The plot, as you English say, thickens. There is more, Dubois continued, clearly reluctant to proceed. The envelope that Marcel delivered it was not the first. Our security cameras have recorded at least 6 similar deliveries over the past month. Always by Marcel. Always too, Sir Reginald. I felt my pulse quicken. Then, you believe this Marcel fellow was Sir Reginald's accomplice? It would appear so, Dubois agreed, though I confess I cannot understand the arrangement. Why would Marcel help Sir Reginald win enormous sums from the casino? What could he possibly gain? Poirot closed his notebook with a decisive snap. That, mon ami, is indeed the question of paramount importance. Tell me, where might we find this? Marcel Beaumont this morning. He should be reporting for the day shift within the hour, Dubois replied, consulting his pocket watch. Though I should warn you, Gentleman Marcel has seemed increasingly nervous of late. Yesterday, before Sir Reginald's collapse, I observed him twice in animated conversation with persons unknown to me. Describe these persons, if you please. One was a woman of perhaps 30, elegantly dressed, but with the manner of someone attempting to appear more sophisticated than her natural station. The other was a gentleman of middle years, well appointed, but with the bearing of someone under considerable strain. Poirot and I exchanged glances. The case was developing complexities that extended far beyond a simple heart attack at the gambling tables. Monsieur Dubois, said Poirot, rising from his chair with characteristic precision. Poirot would be most grateful for the opportunity to examine the scene of Sir Reginald's collapse, and perhaps to speak with this Marcel Beaumont when he arrives. Certainement, Dubois replied, though his expression suggested he was beginning to regret involving us in the casino's affairs. Though I trust you gentlemen will be discreet. The reputation of the establishment must be considered. As we prepared to leave his office, Poirot paused at the door and turned back to face our host. His expression had grown thoughtful, almost philosophical. One final question, Monsieur Dubois. In your experience, when a gambler wins consistently over an extended period, what is the house's traditional response? Dubois smiled grimly. Why, Monsieur Poirot, we changed the rules of the game. The morning sun slanted through the tall windows as we descended toward the main gaming floor, and I found myself wondering whether Sir Reginald Pembroke had discovered too late that someone had indeed changed the rules, with fatal consequences. Chapter 3. The Widow's Inheritance. First interview was to be with Lady Vivian Pembroke, whom we found taking breakfast on the terrace of the Hotel Hermitage, Monaco's most fashionable establishment. She presented a striking figure against the backdrop of the azure woman of perhaps 35 with platinum blonde hair, arranged in the latest fashion, and a complexion that spoke of careful attention to beauty treatments rather than natural bloom. Gentlemen, she said, rising gracefully from her table as we approached, how kind of you to call. I do hope you'll forgive the informality, but I find that grief affects my appetite most dreadfully, and the sea does seem to provide some comfort. Her manner was perfectly composed, though I detected a certain theatrical quality to her expressions of sorrow that put me somewhat on guard. She wore black, naturally, but it was a becoming shade that enhanced rather than diminished her considerable attractions. "Lady Pembroke," said Poirot, executing a small bow, "permit me to express our condolences on your tragic loss. I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my friend Captain Hastings. We are assisting the casino management in understanding the circumstances of your husband's collapse." "How very thorough of them," she replied, gesturing for us to be seated. "Though, I confess, I cannot imagine what assistance you might provide." Poor Reginald's weak heart was no secret to those who knew him well. Poirot settled himself carefully in the wrought-iron chair, his keen eyes studying Lady Vivian's face with characteristic intensity. "His heart was weak, you say? Had he been under a physician's care?" "Oh, for years," she confirmed, reaching for her coffee cup with hands that trembled slightly. Dr. Morrison in Harley Street had warned him repeatedly about the dangers of excitement and stress. But Reginald was always such a headstrong man. He would never listen to medical advice when it conflicted with his pleasures. His pleasures being gambling? I inquired. Lady Vivian's laugh held a note of bitterness. "Among others, Captain Matata. My husband was a man of considerable appetites. The gaming tables were merely his most recent obsession." Recent? Poirot's eyebrows rose fractionally. He had not always been a gambler. "Heavens, no. When I married him 3 years ago, Reginald rarely touched a playing card. This passion for Monte Carlo began only within the past few months. He would disappear for days at a time, returning with either wild tales of enormous wins, or black moods that lasted for weeks." She paused to sip her coffee, and I noticed that her eyes did not quite meet ours as she spoke. There was something in her manner that suggested careful preparation of her responses. "Lady Pembroke," said Poirot gently, "forgive the indelicate nature of the question, but your husband's recent gambling, did it cause financial difficulties?" "Not at all," she replied, quickly, perhaps too quickly. If anything, Reginald had been winning quite substantially. He spoke of little else these past weeks: his incredible luck, his infallible system, his certainty that he had discovered some secret of the roulette wheel. He mentioned a system, constantly. He claimed to have worked out mathematical probabilities. Though between you and me, gentlemen, Reginald was never particularly gifted with numbers. His success in business came from intuition and force of personality, not calculation. Poirot made a note in his small book. "On the evening of his death, Lady Pembroke, where were you when the tragedy occurred?" "Shopping," she answered without hesitation. "I spent the entire evening in the boutiques along the Avenue de Beausoleil. Reginald preferred to gamble alone. He found my presence distracting." "And you have receipts, naturally, to confirm your purchases?" For the first time, Lady Vivian's composure showed a crack. "Receipts? Well, I'm sure the shopkeepers would remember me. I made several substantial purchases." "Not a Relmong," murmured Poirot. "Perhaps you could provide us with the names of these establishments." Before she could respond, we were interrupted by the arrival of a young man of perhaps 28, tall and dark-haired, with a sort of lean, aristocratic features that marked him unmistakably as a Pembroke. His clothes were well cut but showed signs of wear, and his manner carried an undercurrent of barely controlled tension. "Thomas," exclaimed Lady Vivian, her voice rising an octave, "I wasn't expecting you so early." "Stepmother," he replied stiffly, barely acknowledging her presence before turning to us. "I assume you gentlemen are here about my father's death." "Thomas Pembroke," he continued, extending his hand first to Poirot, then to me. "The late Sir Reginald's son, his only legitimate heir, I might add." The emphasis on legitimate was not lost on Lady Vivian, whose cheeks flushed with anger. "Really, Thomas, such vulgarity is hardly appropriate under the circumstances, isn't it?" he shot back, his voice heavy with resentment. "Father's body is barely cold, and already you're planning how to spend his fortune. How dare you?" she protested, but Thomas had already turned his attention back to us. "Gentlemen, I arrived in Monaco only yesterday morning, hoping to reconcile with my father after our disagreement. I had not seen him for nearly 2 years. "A disagreement about what, if I may ask?" inquired Poirot. Thomas's jaw tightened. "About her," he said, nodding toward Lady Vivian. "I thought father was making a fool of himself, marrying a woman young enough to be his daughter. We quarreled, and he cut off my allowance. Thomas was always jealous of his father's happiness." Lady Vivian interjected coldly. "Happiness?" Thomas laughed harshly. Is that what you call it? Father mortgaged everything for his gambling obsession. The factories, the London house, even mother's jewels, all of it pledged to support his ridiculous faith in the roulette wheel. This was news to me and clearly to Poirot as well, judging by the sharpening of his attention. You are certain of this? Poirot asked. Absolutely. I spent yesterday afternoon with father's solicitor here in Monaco. The estate is leveraged to the hilt. If father's gambling streak had ended as gambling streaks always do, we would have faced complete ruin. Lady Vivian had gone quite pale. That's impossible. Reginald never mentioned. There's a great deal Reginald never mentioned to you, my dear stepmother, Thomas interrupted, including the fact that he had been receiving anonymous letters for the past month. Letters? Poirot leaned forward, with sharp interest. Threatening letters. According to his solicitor, someone who knew about his gambling debts was demanding payment of a different sort. Father was frightened, though he tried to hide it. The revelation hung heavy in the Mediterranean air as the three of us absorbed its implications. Lady Vivian stared at her stepson as though seeing him for the first time, while Thomas's expression remained grimly satisfied at having delivered his blow. Poirot closed his notebook with deliberate precision and rose from his chair, his movements betraying nothing of the excitement I knew he must be feeling at this new development. The case was becoming more complex by the hour, with family resentments, financial ruin, and anonymous threats adding dangerous new dimensions to what had appeared a simple death from natural causes. Chapter 4. The Count's Secret Tower. Next appointment was with Count Alexei Volkovsky, whom Monsieur Dubois had identified as one of the casino's most regular patrons. We found him in the hotel's elegant, smoking, roomer, man of perhaps 50 with the bearing of old aristocracy and the slightly worn elegance that spoke of fortunes lost to revolution and exile. The Count rose gracefully as we approached, executing a formal bow that belonged to another century. Gentlemen, Monsieur Dubois informed me you wished to speak with me regarding poor Sir Reginald's unfortunate demise. His English was perfect, though coloured by a faint accent that added to his distinguished air. He was impeccably dressed in a manner that suggested considerable expense carefully applied, and his hands I noticed bore the soft pallor of a man unaccustomed to physical labour. Count Volkovsky, said Poirot, settling into a leather armchair. We understand that you were acquainted with Sir Reginald Pembroke. Indeed, the Count replied, lighting a cigarette with a gold lighter that caught the afternoon light. We had struck up something of a friendship over the past several weeks. Both of us, you understand, were strangers in Monaco, he from England, I from more distant shores. You are Russian? I inquired. By birth, yes, though I have made my home in various European capitals since circumstances made remaining in Russia inadvisable. His smile was rueful but practiced, as though he had told this story many times before. Poirot's eyes fixed on the Count's cigarette case, which bore an elaborate monogram in Cyrillic letters. You and Sir Reginald, you discussed your respective situations. Naturally, fellow exiles have much in common, even when their exile is voluntary rather than necessary. The Count's pause was significant, though he maintained his composed demeanour. Sir Reginald was in exile? I asked, somewhat confused. Mon ami, Poirot interjected smoothly. The Count refers to Sir Reginald's temporary residence here in Monaco, away from his usual haunts. Tell me, Count Volkovsky, what was your impression of Sir Reginald's gambling? The Count's expression grew thoughtful. Most remarkable, I must say. In all my years of observing games of chansand, I have observed many I have never witnessed. Such consistent success. It was almost as though what? Poirot prompted gently. As though he possessed some supernatural insight into the workings of fortune herself. We Russians, we have always believed in the capricious nature of luck, but Sir Reginald's success defied all natural law. Did he ever speak to you about his methods? Curious that you should ask, the Count replied, his pale eyes growing distant. On several occasions, he hinted at having discovered what he called the pattern behind the chaos. He claimed that careful observation could reveal the hidden rhythms that governed even seemingly random events. And you believed this theory? The Count's laugh was soft but carried an undertone of something I couldn't quite identify. Monsieur Poirot, I have lived through revolution, civil war, and the collapse of everything I once held sacred. I have learned that truth often wears the mask of impossibility. Poirot made a note in his little book. On the evening of Sir Reginald's death, Count, where were you? Here in the casino. Naturally, I witnessed the entire tragic episode from a neighboring table. The Count's voice grew solemn. Poor fellow simply collapsed at the moment of his greatest triumph. His greatest triumph, the wager he was about to place. It would have been enormous, perhaps the largest single bet in the casino's history. Sir Reginald had been building toward this moment for weeks, accumulating wins like a general gathering forces for a decisive battle. I felt a chill at the military metaphor. You make it sound like he was at war. In a sense, Captain, are we not all at war with fate? Sir Reginald simply chose a more visible battlefield than most. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another gentleman, a solid, middle-aged man with the ruddy complexion and somewhat rumpled appearance of the English middle class. His expression was one of barely controlled agitation. "I beg your pardon," he said, approaching our table with obvious reluctance. "Count Volkovsky, isn't it? I believe we may have met briefly at the baccarat tables last week." The Count's demeanor shifted subtly, becoming more guarded. "Of course, Mr. Morrison. How may I be of service?" Morrison's eyes darted nervously between the Count and ourselves. "I couldn't help overhearing you were discussing poor Pembroke's death. Terrible business, absolutely terrible." "You knew Sir Reginald?" Poirot inquired with interest. "Knew him? God, yes, I knew him." Morrison's voice carried a bitterness that surprised me. "Lost a fortune to the man over the past month. Every time I thought I had the measure of the tables, there he'd be winning on the exact numbers I'd been considering." "Most frustrating," murmured the Count, though his tone suggested something other than sympathy. "Frustrating." Morrison's face reddened. "It was ruinous. I came to Monaco with my wife's inheritance, £20,000 that was meant to secure our retirement. Pembroke's impossible streak cost me everything." Poirot leaned forward with sharp attention. "You blame Sir Reginald for your losses. Blame him." The man was either the luckiest gambler in history, or Morrison's voice trailed off, as though he had said more than he intended. "Or what, Mr. Morrison?" Poirot's voice was deceptively gentle. "Nothing. Nothing at all." Morrison straightened, his shoulders with visible effort. "I merely wished to pay my respects. Poor fellow. Whatever his methods, he didn't deserve to die like that." As Morrison hurried away, I noticed the Count watching his departure with thoughtful eyes. When he turned back to us, his expression had grown more serious. "Gentlemen, I feel I should warn you," he said quietly, stubbing out his cigarette with deliberate care. "There are others here in Monaco who shared Mr. Morrison's frustration with Sir Reginald's success. The gambling community is small and closely knit. When one man wins consistently, others must lose." "You suspect someone of harboring murderous intentions?" I asked directly. The Count's smile returned, but it no longer reached his eyes. "I suspect, Captain Hastings, that in a place where fortunes change hands nightly, the line between business and personal becomes very thin indeed." As we prepared to leave the smoking room, I noticed that the Count had left his cigarette case on the table. When I pointed this out, he waved dismissively and told us to leave it, he had others. Yet, as we walked away, I saw him return surreptitiously to retrieve it, his movements quick and furtive. The gesture struck me as oddly out of character for a man of his apparent breeding and composure, though I could not say precisely why it troubled me. Chapter 5. The Croupier's Dilemma. Following morning brought with it a telephone call from Inspector Javert of the Monaco police, requesting Poirot's immediate presence at the prefecture. The tone of the inspector's voice suggested developments of considerable importance, and we hastened through the narrow streets of Monte Carlo with unusual speed. Inspector Javert, lean man with intelligent dark eyes and the precise manner of the French bureaucracy, greeted us in his sparse office overlooking the harbour. Upon his desk lay several official documents and what appeared to be a medical report bearing numerous official seals. "Monsieur Poirot," he began without preamble, "I have received the complete autopsy results on Sir Reginald Pembroke. The findings are most disturbing." Poirot settled himself in the offered chair with characteristic composure. "The gentleman did not die of natural causes." "No," Javert replied grimly. "Sir Reginald was poisoned. The pathologist has identified traces of digitalin in his system, a substance derived from the foxglove plant. Most significantly, the concentration was sufficient to cause death within approximately 15 minutes of ingestion." I felt the familiar thrill that accompanies the transformation of apparent accident into deliberate murder. 15 minutes, exactly, within a narrow margin. Yes, Digitalin produces symptoms that mimic cardiac arrest, making it an ideal poison for someone wishing to disguise murder as natural death. However, our pathologist is quite certain of his findings. Poirot, fingers drummed silently against the arm of his chair. This digitalinate is difficult to obtain. Not particularly, Javert admitted. Any competent pharmacist or botanist would have access to it. The plant itself grows commonly throughout Europe, and the extraction process, while requiring some knowledge, is not impossibly complex, and the method of administration, most likely in food or drink, given the timing. Sir Reginald dined at the casino restaurant approximately 1 hour before his collapse, though he consumed only a light meal and a single cocktail at the gaming tables. Poirot made careful notes in his little book. This cocktail, who served it to him? According to the casino staff, it was delivered by Marcel Beaumont, same junior croupier who Monsieur Dubois mentioned to you yesterday. I exchanged glances with Poirot. Our investigation was beginning to center around the nervous young employee with gambling debts. Inspector, said Poirot. Poirot would be most grateful for the opportunity to speak with this Marcel Beaumont. Naturally, I have arranged for him to be brought here within the hour. In the meantime, perhaps you would care to examine the victim's personal effects. Javert produced a leather valise containing Sir Reginald's belongings from the casino. Among the usual items, wallet, pocket watch, handkerchief, and keys. Poirot's attention was immediately drawn to a small notebook bound in Morocco leather. Voila, he murmured, opening it carefully. Sir Reginald's gambling records. Perhaps the notebook contained meticulous entries in Sir Reginald's careful handwriting, detailing his wins and losses over the previous month. More intriguingly, it included what appeared to be a series of mathematical calculations and several small sketches of roulette wheel layouts. Terse interessant, Poirot observed. See here, Hastings. Sir Reginald was indeed attempting to discern patterns in the wheel's behavior. I peered over his shoulder at the complex notations. Do you suppose he actually discovered something? Perhaps someone wished him to believe he had. Poirot turned to a page near the back of the notebook. Observe these entries from the past week. Each winning number is preceded by a small mark, almost like a check or confirmation. Before I could respond, Inspector Javert announced the arrival of Marcel Beaumont. The young man who entered the office bore little resemblance to the confident casino employee one might expect. Marcel was pale and thin, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervous habit of running his hands through his black hair. His clothes were neat but showed signs of financial constraint. Marcel Beaumont, inquired Javert sternly. Oui, Monsieur l'Inspecteur, Marcel replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Please be seated, said Poirot gently, assuming control of the interview. We wish merely to clarify certain details regarding Sir Reginald Pembroke's final evening. Marcel's hands trembled as he gripped the arms of his chair. Sir Reginald, mon Dieu, I still cannot believe he is dead. You served him a cocktail shortly before his collapse. A whiskey and soda. He requested it specifically, as he always did before placing large wagers. Always. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. This was a regular occurrence. For the past month, yes. Sir Reginald had very specific habits. He would arrive at 8, observe the tables for precisely 30 minutes, then request his usual drink before beginning to play. And on this particular evening, was there anything unusual about his behavior? Marcel hesitated, his eyes darting between Poirot and Inspector Javert. He seemed ... more excited than usual, almost feverish with anticipation. He kept checking his pocket watch and muttering calculations under his breath. Did he speak to you directly? Only to request the drink. But Marcel's voice trailed off uncertainly. Mais oui, Poirot encouraged. There was an envelope beneath his napkin when I brought the cocktail. A small white envelope, sealed. Sir Reginald opened it immediately and read the contents with great satisfaction. This confirmed what Monsieur Dubois had told us about the mysterious messages. Did you observe who might have placed this envelope? Monsieur, the table service area is quite busy during the evening hours. Any member of the staff might have had the opportunity. Poirot leaned forward intently. Marcel, I must ask you directly, are you in financial difficulties? The young man's composure crumbled entirely. How did you? It is true. I owe money to certain establishments. More money than I can possibly repay on my casino salary. How much money? Inspector Javert interjected sharply. 15,000 francs, Marcel whispered, his face flushing with shame. I borrowed from a private gaming house in Nice. They have been most insistent about repayment. I whistled softly. The sum represented several years' wages for a junior casino employee. These creditors, said Poirot, have they made specific threats? Marcel nodded miserably. They gave me until the end of this week to find the money. If I cannot pay, he shuddered visibly. And yet, Poirot observed gently, you continued to work at the casino, serving the very man whose extraordinary winnings had become legendary throughout Monaco. I had no choice. I needed my employment to survive, even though watching Sir Reginald win fortune after fortune was like torture. Every night I served him drinks while he won more in a single evening than I could earn in a lifetime. Did anyone approach you about Sir Reginald? Offer you money in exchange for ... assistance? Marcel's eyes widened in genuine alarm. You think I helped someone poison him? No, never. Whatever my debts, I am not a murderer. But someone did approach you, Poirot pressed, his tone remaining gentle but insistent. After a long moment, Marcel nodded reluctantly. A woman came to see me 3 days ago. She offered to pay my debts in exchange for information about Sir Reginald's habits when he arrived, what he drank, his usual routines. Describe this woman. Elegant, perhaps 35 years old, with blonde hair. She spoke English with a refined accent. She claimed to be a journalist writing about famous gamblers. Inspector Javert and I exchanged meaningful glances. The description fitted Lady Vivian Pembroke perfectly. Did you accept her offer? I told her about Sir Reginald's habits. They were hardly secret. But I swear upon my mother's grave, I knew nothing about poison. I thought she was merely curious about his gambling methods. As Marcel was led away for formal questioning, sat in thoughtful silence, his fingers steepled before him. The web of connections was growing ever more complex, with Lady Vivian apparently conducting her own investigation into her husband's activities, while Marcel's desperate financial situation had made him vulnerable to manipulation. The question remained, who had possessed both the knowledge to use digitalin and the precise timing necessary to ensure Sir Reginald's death at the crucial moment of his greatest wager? Chapter 6. Probability and Psychology. That afternoon found us once again in the casino's main salon. Though this time Poirot's purpose was distinctly different from our previous visits. He had requested permission from Monsieur Dubois to conduct what he termed a small experiment in probability, and had spent the better part of an hour studying the roulette wheels with the intensity of a scientist examining specimens under a microscope. Hastings, he said, producing a small notebook filled with columns of numbers, observe the patterns that emerge when one studies these wheels over extended periods. I confess that the mathematical intricacies of gambling have always been beyond my comprehension, but I dutifully examined his careful notations. Each wheel's performance had been recorded in meticulous detail, with winning numbers tracked across multiple sessions. What exactly are you looking for? Precisement what Sir Reginald believed he had discovered, the hidden rhythms that might make prediction possible. Poirot's finger traced across his calculations. But observe here, mon ami, the patterns exist only for certain wheels, and only during specific time periods. You mean the wheels are rigged? Not rigged in the conventional sense, but consider this: even the most perfectly balanced wheel will develop tiny imperfections over time. A skilled observer might detect these subtle biases, particularly if they had access to maintenance schedules and wheel rotation patterns. The implications began to dawn on me. Someone with inside knowledge could have fed Sir Reginald this information. Exactement, and such a person would need intimate access to casino operations, detailed knowledge of mechanical systems, and Poirot paused meaningfully, a compelling reason to ensure Sir Reginald's eventual destruction. Our conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Inspector Javert, who approached our table with an expression of considerable agitation. Monsieur Poirot, he said urgently, we have discovered something most disturbing. Lady Pembroke's alibi for the evening of her husband's death, it appears to be entirely fabricated. This was indeed significant news. In what way fabricated? The shops she claimed to visit were all closed by the time she said she was shopping. Furthermore, the hotel concierge confirms that she returned to the Hermitage at 9, a full hour before Sir Reginald's collapse. Poirot closed his notebook with a decisive snap, and she claimed to learn of her husband's death only the following morning. Precisely, yet the hotel records show she made several telephone calls from her suite that very evening, one to a London solicitor at 11:30. Most illuminating, murmured Poirot. What of the son Thomas Pembroke? His story also contains discrepancies. He claims to have spent the evening in his hotel room, but the night clerk distinctly remembers seeing him leave the building at approximately 10:15. The case was becoming ever more complex, with each suspect's carefully constructed alibi beginning to crumble under scrutiny. Yet something in Poirot's manner suggested these revelations, while significant, were not entirely unexpected. "Inspector," said Poirot, "there is another matter we must investigate. The anonymous letters that Sir Reginald received, have any traces of them been found?" "Malheureusement, no. It appears Sir Reginald was most thorough in destroying all correspondence. However, his London solicitor has confirmed that Sir Reginald spoke of receiving threatening messages demanding payment of debts beyond money. Très intéressant. And Count Volkovsky, what have your inquiries revealed about his background?" Javert consulted his notes. "The Count's credentials appear genuine, though his financial situation is precarious. He survives primarily through gambling winnings and the occasional sale of family heirlooms. Most interestingly, he previously worked as a mechanical engineer in St. Petersburg before the revolution. This detail struck me as potentially significant. Engineering knowledge would certainly help in understanding wheel mechanics." "Indeed," agreed Jack, "and we have discovered that he befriended Sir Reginald shortly after the Englishman's winning streak began." "What of James Morrison?" I inquired. "His losses were even more substantial than he admitted. Our inquiries with his bank in London reveal that he had liquidated his entire investment portfolio to fund his Monaco gambling. He stands to face bankruptcy upon his return to England." Poirot had been listening to these revelations with growing thoughtfulness. Now he rose from his chair and began pacing the salon floor with characteristic precision. "Miss Amos," he said finally, "we have before us a most ingenious crime. Consider the psychological elements at play. A man convinced he has discovered the secret of beating chance itself, lured into ever larger wagers by a confidence that grows with each success. You believe Sir Reginald was deliberately manipulated. I believe, Hastings, that someone understood both his personality and his weaknesses with remarkable clarity. Sir Reginald was a proud man, a successful industrialist, accustomed to bending circumstances to his will. When presented with what appeared to be a foolproof system for gambling success, his ego would not permit him to question too closely. But who possessed such intimate knowledge of his character?" asked Inspector Javert. "Ah," said Poirot, his eyes gleaming, "that is indeed the crucial question. Who among our suspects knew Sir Reginald well enough to predict his reactions, had access to the technical knowledge necessary to identify wheel biases, and possessed both the patience and the ruthlessness to execute such an elaborate deception as, if summoned by our discussion, James Morrison appeared at our table, his face bearing the haggard expression of a man who had spent sleepless nights contemplating financial ruin. "Excuse me," he said hesitantly, "but I couldn't help overhearing your conversation. If you're investigating Pembroke's death, there's something I think you should know." "Please, Mr. Morrison," said Poirot, gesturing to an empty chair. "Do tell us." Morrison sat heavily, his hands trembling slightly. "It's about those letters Pembroke was receiving. I saw him reading one the night before he died. He was visibly shaken by its contents." "You observed this? How?" "I was at the bar, drowning my sorrows after another disastrous session at the tables. Pembroke was sitting alone in one of the alcoves, and I saw him open an envelope that had been delivered by a waiter. After reading it, he went quite pale and immediately burned a letter in the ashtray." "Did you see who delivered this envelope?" "It wasn't any of the regular casino staff, I'm sure of that. It was a woman elegantly dressed, wearing a hat, with a veil that concealed her face." Inspector Javert leaned forward sharply. "Can you describe this woman more precisely?" "Medium height, graceful movement, expensive clothes, but the veil made identification impossible. She approached Pembroke's table, placed the envelope beside his drink, and departed without speaking." "What time was this?" "Just past 10, I remember, because I was contemplating whether to risk my last 100 francs on one final gamble." As Morrison continued his account, I noticed that Poirot's attention had become focused on something beyond our immediate conversation. Following his gaze, I observed Count Volkovsky entering the salon, accompanied by a woman whose appearance immediately commanded attention. She was perhaps 40, with auburn hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to moving in sophisticated circles. The Count's expression when he noticed our group betrayed a momentary flash of something surprise, perhaps, or concern before settling back into his usual composed mask. He guided his companion toward a distant table, but not before she had cast a long, calculating look in our direction. The pieces of this complex puzzle were slowly beginning to arrange themselves in my mind. Though their ultimate configuration remained tantalizingly unclear, yet I sensed that Poirot's methodical investigation was approaching some crucial revelation, and that the mysterious dynamics of Monaco's gambling society were about to yield their darkest secrets. Chapter 7. The Gathering Storm. The following evening, Poirot made his dramatic announcement in the casino's main salon, his voice carrying that peculiar authority that always preceded his most brilliant revelations. "Mesdames et messieurs," he declared to the assembled group of suspects, staff, and officials, "tomorrow at 8 o'clock precisely, Poirot will reveal the truth behind the death of Sir Reginald Pembroke. I request that all interested parties gather in the casino's private salon for this illumination." The effect of this pronouncement was immediate and revealing. Lady Vivian's face went quite pale beneath her carefully applied rouge, while Thomas Pembroke's jaw tightened with barely concealed tension. Count Volkovsky maintained his aristocratic composure, but I noticed his fingers drumming nervously against his cigarette case. James Morrison appeared almost relieved, as though welcoming the prospect of resolution regardless of its nature. Most intriguingly, Marcel Beaumont, who had been released from police custody, pending further investigations, seemed genuinely frightened, rather than merely anxious. His eyes darted between the various suspects, as though seeking to identify some hidden threat among them. "Poirot," I murmured, as we departed the casino, "you've certainly stirred up a hornet's nest. Are you quite certain you know who the murderer is?" "Mon ami," he replied with characteristic confidence, "Poirot's little grey cells have been most active. The pattern it begins to emerge with clarity. But first, there is one final experiment I must conduct." That night, I was awakened by sounds of movement from Poirot's adjacent room. Concerned, I donned my dressing gown and knocked softly on his door. "Entrez, Hastings," came his voice, and I found him fully dressed, examining what appeared to be a collection of casino chips and a small mechanical device I didn't recognize. "Good heavens, Poirot, what are you doing at this hour?" "Testing a theory about probability and human psychology," he replied, holding up a pair of dice. "Consider this: what if someone could predict not the outcome of each individual spin, but the psychological moment when a gambler would make his largest wager?" "I'm afraid I don't follow." "Sir Reginald was manipulated." "Yes, but not merely through information about wheel biases. Someone understood his character with such precision that they could predict exactly when he would risk everything on a single bet." Before I could ask for clarification, we were interrupted by urgent knocking at the door. Inspector Javert stood in the hallway, his usually composed manner betraying considerable agitation. "Monsieur Poirot," he said breathlessly, "there has been an attempted break-in at Sir Reginald's hotel suite. The intruder fled when discovered by security, but not before ransacking the room thoroughly." "Très intéressant," murmured Poirot. "What specifically was the intruder seeking?" "That is unclear. Sir Reginald's personal effects had already been removed by the police, but the intruder seemed particularly interested in the writing desk and the bedroom safe." "The safe, was it opened?" "No, but there were clear signs of an attempt." "Professional work, according to our experts." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "Professional indeed. Tell me, Inspector, have you discovered what Sir Reginald kept in that safe during his lifetime?" "According to the hotel staff, he deposited something there only 2 days before his death. A sealed envelope, they believe, though its contents remain unknown to us, and this envelope is missing. The safe was not open, so presumably it remains inside. However, the combination died with Sir Reginald." "Ah, but perhaps not entirely," Poirot said mysteriously. "Hastings, we must examine that safe first thing in the morning." As Inspector Javert departed, I found myself increasingly puzzled by the evening's developments. "Poirot, why would someone risk breaking into the hotel now when Sir Reginald is already dead?" "Because, mon ami, they realized that their careful plan may have overlooked one crucial detail. Something Sir Reginald possessed, some evidence or document that could expose the entire conspiracy." "But what sort of evidence?" "Consider the psychology of our victim. Sir Reginald was a successful businessman, accustomed to documenting his transactions and keeping careful records. What if he had begun to suspect that his gambling success was not entirely natural?" The thought was chilling. "You mean he discovered he was being manipulated?" And if Sir Reginald suspected treachery, what would be his natural response? He would gather evidence, I realized with growing understanding, document the deception for future use, and such evidence would represent a mortal threat to his killer. Hence, tonight's desperate attempt to retrieve it. The next morning brought further developments that heightened the atmosphere of tension surrounding our case. Lady Vivian Pembroke had apparently spent a sleepless night, for she appeared at breakfast with dark circles under her eyes, and a nervous manner quite at odds with her usual sophisticated composure. Thomas Pembroke, meanwhile, had been observed in earnest conversation with Count Volkovsky in the hotel lobby, their discussion apparently heated despite their efforts to maintain discretion. Most significantly, James Morrison had departed Monaco suddenly during the night, leaving behind only a brief note claiming urgent business in London. Inspector Javert had immediately dispatched telegrams to the British authorities, but Morrison's flight struck me as the action of either a guilty man or one who feared for his safety. "Poirot," I said, as we made our way to Sir Reginald's hotel, "Morrison's departure seems rather suspicious, or entirely logical." Poirot replied thoughtfully, "Consider his position: a man ruined by gambling losses, present at the scene of a murder, with clear motive for revenge against the victim. Perhaps Monsieur Morrison realized that remaining in Monaco would only increase suspicion upon him, but surely an innocent man would stay to clear his name. Hastings, you assume that only the guilty have reason to fear, but in a case such as this, where motives and opportunities abound, even the innocent may find themselves in considerable danger." The examination of Sir Reginald's safe proved both frustrating and illuminating. Despite the best efforts of the hotel's locksmith, the mechanism resisted all attempts at opening. However, Poirot's careful inspection of the safe's exterior revealed something: the would-be burglar had missed tiny scratches around the lock that suggested it had been opened recently, and not by the hotel's staff. "Voila," he murmured, producing his magnifying glass. "Regard as these marks are fresh, made within the past week. Someone who knew the combination has accessed this safe since Sir Reginald's death. But who could have known the combination? Someone to whom Sir Reginald had entrusted a door, someone who observed him opening it." Poirot straightened, his expression growing grim. "And if that person has already retrieved what they sought, tonight's break-in attempt was merely an elaborate deception." As we prepared to leave the hotel, I caught sight of Count Volkovsky in the lobby, apparently reading a newspaper. Yet something in his posture suggested he was more interested in our activities than in the day's headlines. When our eyes met briefly, his expression remained perfectly neutral, but I detected a quality of watchful calculation that sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. The stage was set for Poirot's grand revelation, but I found myself wondering whether we were the hunters in this deadly game, or whether we too had become prey in a conspiracy more complex and dangerous than any of us had yet imagined. Chapter 8. The House Always Wins. At precisely 8 o'clock that evening, the casino's elegant private salon hosted what would prove to be one of Hercule Poirot's most masterful expositions. The room's crystal chandeliers cast dramatic shadows across the assembled company, creating an atmosphere befitting the revelation of a most ingenious crime. Lady Vivian Pembroke sat rigidly in a high-backed chair, her black evening dress lending her an air of tragic dignity that barely concealed her obvious nervousness. Thomas Pembroke positioned himself near the windows, his face bearing the expression of a man braced for unpleasant revelations. Count Volkovsky maintained his aristocratic composure, though I noticed his fingers repeatedly adjusting his cigarette case. Marcel Beaumont sat apart from the others, his young face pale with anxiety. Inspector Javert represented official authority, while Monsieur Dubois hovered near the door, clearly torn between curiosity and concern for his establishment's reputation. "Madame et Messieurs," Poirot began, rising from his chair with theatrical precision, "we gather tonight to illuminate a crime of remarkable sophistication, the murder of Sir Reginald Pembroke." "Murder?" Thomas Pembroke interrupted sharply. "The official verdict was heart failure." But that was before the toxicology examination revealed the presence of digitalin." Poirot replied smoothly. "Sir Reginald was indeed murdered, and with a poison specifically chosen to mimic cardiac arrest." Lady Vivian's hand flew to her throat. "Poison? But who would do such a terrible thing?" "Someone who understood 3 crucial elements," Poirot continued, beginning his characteristic pacing. "First, the precise timing required for digitalin to take effect. Second, Sir Reginald's gambling habits and psychological weaknesses. Third, the mechanical properties of the casino's roulette wheels. Count Volkovsky leaned forward slightly. You suggest this was an elaborate conspiracy. Precisement, Count Volkovsky. But first, permit me to explain Sir Reginald's extraordinary winning streak. For 4 weeks, he won consistently because someone was providing him with accurate predictions about wheel behavior. Impossible, protested Monsieur Dubois. Our wheels are perfectly maintained and not impossible. Monsieur Dubois, highly technical. You see, even perfectly balanced wheels develop minute imperfections over time. A skilled mechanical engineer, with access to maintenance, schedules, and detailed observation, could identify these biases and predict which numbers would appear more frequently during specific periods. I saw understanding dawn on Inspector Jack's face. Someone with engineering knowledge was manipulating the information. Exactement. But this was not a scheme to help Sir Reginald. It was designed to destroy him. Consider the psychology. A proud, successful man, convinced he has discovered the secret of beating chance itself. Each win increases his confidence, leading inevitably to larger and larger wagers. You're suggesting someone deliberately created his winning streak? Thomas asked incredulously. Indeed, someone who understood that Sir Reginald's character would compel him to risk everything on one final, enormous bet. The question was who possessed the necessary knowledge, opportunity, and motive. Poirot paused dramatically, his gaze sweeping across the assembled suspects. Let us examine each of you in turn. Lady Vivian, you had financial motive as Sir Reginald's heir. You lied about your alibi, questioned Marcel about your husband's habits, and made suspicious telephone calls on the night of the murder. Lady Vivian's face flushed with indignation. How dare you suggest patience, madame? I merely state facts. Thomas Pembroke, you faced financial ruin due to your father's gambling and had been estranged from him for 2 years. Your whereabouts on the crucial evening are unaccounted for. This is preposterous, Thomas protested. Count Volkovsky possessed the mechanical engineering knowledge necessary to analyze wheel behavior. Your friendship with Sir Reginald began precisely when his winning streak commenced. Most tellingly, Poirot produced a small envelope. You smoke a particular brand of Russian cigarettes that leaves a distinctive aroma. On the night of Sir Reginald's death, someone who smoked those cigarettes was present near his table shortly before his collapse. I detected that scent when I examined the scene. Marcel Beaumont shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Monsieur Poirot, surely you don't suspect me. I had no knowledge of poisons or engineering. No, Marcel, you were merely the instrument. A young man with gambling debts, vulnerable to manipulation by someone who understood your desperation. Poirot turned to face the window, his reflection visible in the dark glass. But none of these obvious suspects committed the murder. The true killer required not only technical knowledge and opportunity, but also intimate understanding of Sir Reginald's character and access to his personal habits. Then who? Demanded Inspector Javert impatiently. Someone who has been present throughout our investigation, but has remained carefully in the background. Someone with the perfect cover for observing everyone's movements and reactions, who could monitor the progress of our investigation and attempt to retrieve evidence from Sir Reginald's safe. Poirot spun around to face Monsieur Dubois, who had gone deathly pale. Voilà Monsieur Dubois, manager of this casino and architect of Sir Reginald's destruction. The accusation struck the room like a thunderbolt. Dubois backed toward the door, his diplomatic composure crumbling. This is madness, he protested. Why would I murder one of our most profitable customers? Because Sir Reginald was not profitable. He was ruinous. His winning streak, which you orchestrated through your engineering background and access to wheel maintenance data, was designed to lure him into mortgaging his entire fortune for one final bet. But I told you about his wins myself. What better way to deflect suspicion than to appear concerned about his success? You fed him just enough accurate information to build his confidence, knowing that his personality would compel him to risk everything. Poirot pulled out Sir Reginald's notebook. The crucial evidence was in his gambling records. Each winning number was marked with a tiny symbol that appears on casino internal maintenance reports. Sir Reginald had begun to suspect. He was being manipulated and was documenting the pattern. You have no proof, Dubois said desperately. Au contraire. The safe combination that you used to retrieve Sir Reginald's evidence was the sequence of his first 6 winning numbers, a code he created because he suspected treachery. You knew this because you provided those numbers. Inspector Javert moved toward Dubois, who suddenly lunged for the door. The detail in Poirot continued relentlessly. Came from your private collection of rare plants, a hobby you mentioned during our first meeting. You administered it in the cocktail Marcel delivered, timing the dose precisely so Sir Reginald would collapse at the moment of placing his largest wager. Why? Thomas Pembroke demanded as Inspector Javert restrained the struggling casino manager. What did you gain from his death? Sir Reginald's final bet would have bankrupted him, Poirot explained. But his death before placing that wager meant his estate remained intact. An estate from which the casino could collect the substantial debts he had accumulated through your manipulated advice. Dead, he was worth more to the casino than alive and bankrupt. Moreover, he continued, Sir Reginald's investigation into the casino's operations threatened to expose not only the will manipulation but also other irregularities in the establishment's accounting. Irregularities that would have cost Monsieur Dubois his position and reputation. As the police led Dubois away, Lady Vivian turned to Poirot with tears in her eyes. To think that his own success was the trap that killed him. Oui, madame. In the end, the house always wins around when it must resort to murder to ensure its victory. The great chandeliers continued to cast their glittering light across the Nauseeland salon, but the atmosphere of elegant vice had been forever tainted by the revelation of how far some would go to maintain the casino's most fundamental principle that chance, like everything else in Monaco, could be bought and sold by those who understood its true price. Outro. Thanks for joining us for Death on the Casino Floor. Did you suspect Monsieur Dubois? Before Poirot revealed how he used Sir Reginald's own success as the weapon for his destruction. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this adventure with Hercule Poirot in the sophisticated gambling halls of Monaco, don't forget to subscribe for more mysteries daily. Until next time, remember Poirot's wisdom, that in games of chance, someone always controls the odds, and that the house's greatest advantage lies, not in mathematics, but in understanding the human heart's capacity for greed. The most dangerous gamble is often the one that appears certain to win. This is Alie signing off from Café Tales.